In most metroidvanias, you find upgrades. In my game, as the day turns, I'm forcing the players to commit several OSHA violations to obtain them. As I said in the previous video, I set up the player model into separate pieces. One of the reasons for this is so that the player can see the consequences of removing their humanity, which will actually help to ensure their own survival. So to start, I made it so that the individual pieces will set their different animations based on if the player has those corresponding abilities. So if the player has a grappling hook, they'll have metal arms. If they have double jump, they'll have one metal leg. And if the player has wall jump, then they'll have all metal limbs. I started off with the double jump, and what I wanted it to look like was that the player was actually using their leg to make a small explosion that would help propel themselves upwards. The way that I did this was first by coding the actual double jump mechanic. I made it so that when the player presses the jump button, the game will check if they are on the ground, and if they are, then they jump up normally. If they aren't, it then checks to see if they have the double jump ability, which if they do, it will make the player jump again. Next, I wanted to make this mechanic look a little bit prettier, so I started by adding a small explosion particle effect that spawns out of the player's leg when they use the double jump ability. Next, I added a very small screen shake as well as a sound cue for when the player uses this ability. With all of these added together, I now had a functioning double jump mechanic that looks visually appealing enough, so I called it good. Next, I wanted to work on the wall jump ability, which was a little bit more of a hassle, both visually and on the programming side, because it's just a little bit more in-depth of a mechanic. For the wall jump mechanic, I wanted it to look like the player was sticking their metal leg into the wall and then using it as a jumping off point, which is kind of visible with what I came up with, but not as noticeable as something else. So to make this idea come to life, I made it so that the game checks to see if the player is against a wall, and then it also checks to see if they're in the air. If they are, it plays specific animations for some of the separate body parts of the character. So some of the characters still has the same falling and jumping animations because it looks good, and then other pieces like the leg have a separate animation. Then I made it so that when the player tries to jump, I set a string variable called wall jump to either left or right. When the wall jump string is set to left, the player is forcibly moved left, and they get a small jump in the air, and when the wall jump string is set to the right, then it will do the same but move the player to the right. This didn't feel quite right yet, so I added another little extra mechanic that if the player is actively moving into the wall when trying to jump, they won't actually push off of the wall, but instead they'll just go up it, which makes it feel a lot smoother, makes it feel more fluid with what you can do with the movement. And it's going to open up avenues when I do some of the level design later. This still looked kind of like shit though, because the player was just kind of sticking their hands and feet into the walls. So I thought, what would Guts from Berserk do? So I took some more inspiration from Berserk, specifically the scene where Guts is climbing the wall of flesh, and I actually made it so that the player now stabs his massive sword in the wall in order to climb it, which looks pretty badass, at least for some pixel art. I also added a new specific wall beautifier that will open up, once again, more avenues for some of the level design later, that makes it so the player is unable to wall jump or slide off of it. I'm calling this sand. Pretty crazy, I know. That's pretty much it for the wall jump, though. For the last ability, I wanted to make the grappling hook, because every game that has a grappling hook just typically does like at least 20% better, probably. I don't know, I made that percentage up. But first, I started off by making the sprites for both the actual grappling hook that the player uses, as well as the object that the player can grapple onto. The sprite I made for the grappling hook is actually just going to be a line that will get drawn up from the player's arm to the grappling object. And then next, I obviously made the grappleable object, which I just took the tree trunk art that I already had, made it a little bit brighter, and then made it a little bit skinnier, and now I'll be able to stick this on walls so you can grapple up to it. Now what I did is I made it so that when the player left-clicks on the grappleable object, it will set the right arm to the grapple animation, and then it sets the player to look at the grapple object, so if the player is looking to the right and they try to grapple to this object to the left, it will then mirror the player and make them look that way. It spawns the grappling hook object, which is just that line, and it then tweens the width of the grappling hook object up to the grappleable object. So basically, like I said, it just draws that line from the player up to the grappleable object. When the grappling hook gets up to the grappleable object, it then draws it back in reverse, so it shrinks the grappling hook, and then it pulls the player up along with it, which gives the idea that you're grappling up. The last things I did to make this look and feel a little bit better was add some simple sound effects, as well as made it so the player can cancel the grappling hook by jumping. I also made it so the player has a very small jump after either canceling the grapple or waiting for it to finish, and if it does finish, it'll play it out automatically. Now that I had the abilities done, I wanted to move on to the special attacks. For these, I'm once again taking inspiration from both Berserk and Sekiro. The idea is that you'll collect prosthetic tools similar to in Sekiro, which you can then use to help yourself in the combat portions of the game. Like with the abilities, the player will actually have to lose an arm to be able to equip one of these prosthetics. To start off, I came up with 3 ideas that are totally original. An arm cannon that's not like Guts's, a crossbow, also not like Guts, and then my friend gave me the idea to actually have a rope that attaches to the great sword, so kind of like the grappling hook, but then what this does is it lets you throw the great sword, and then it'll kind of drag back to you. So, gives you some more range options other than just the arm cannon and crossbow. That is, once again, absolutely original. I plan on releasing releasing another video soon that will actually show the breakdown of exactly how I went about making those abilities, but I wanted to make this video a little bit shorter just to give a general idea of where this game is going. Thank you guys for sticking around to the end of this video. Let me know what you'd like to see added as and maybe more prosthetic tools. And if you want to follow along my journey, then make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell. Thank you.